My wife crashed into our kitchen to prove I no longer rule this house. In 18 years of framing houses, I've learned something most people never think about. A wall doesn't fail because of one bad stud. It fails because you keep loading weight onto a crack you already knew was there, telling yourself it'll hold one more season. What I didn't know that night was she'd already signed half of everything over to another man. I ran a small renovation company here in Spokane. I thought I knew every crack in this house. I was wrong about the one that mattered most. I appreciate you choosing to spend your time here with me. Before we begin, do me a small favor and leave a comment below. Have you ever trusted someone completely with something you built, yes or no? I read every single one. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. The lesson at its core is what truly matters. My wife drove her SUV through the kitchen I built with my own hands on a Tuesday evening in May. Not into the garage. Not through the fence. Through the bay window wall I'd framed. Insulated, drywalled, and painted myself 15 years ago. Back when we still talked about the future like it was something we were building together. The headlights cut through the dust before I even registered the sound, that sick, wet crack of 2x6s snapping in sequence. Like knuckles popping down a fist. Glass from the cabinet doors I'd hung with quarter-inch overlay hinges exploded across the tile. The bumper stopped 6 feet from where I'd been standing. And the engine kept running, ticking like a countdown nobody had asked for. I didn't move. Dust settled on my forearms. On the countertop I'd set with Italian porcelain. On the coffee mug I'd put down 30 seconds earlier. The air tasted like chalk and exhaust drywall powder, coating the back of my throat, while carbon monoxide crept in through the hole where my kitchen wall used to be. The driver's door opened. Lorraine stepped out without a scratch on her. Not a cut, not a bruise, not a hair out of place. And walked toward the street instead of toward me, like the man buried in his own kitchen wall wasn't worth checking on. She smoothed her blouse flat with both palms, an automatic motion. Rehearsed the way she rehearsed everything before a client pitch. And then she turned back just long enough to look at me the way you look at a contractor you're about to fire. "He threatened me!" she screamed, loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear. Then, low, just for me, "Say one word, and I'll tell them you swung first." That was Lorraine Holbrook, 51 years old. The woman who could charm a homeowner into a 6-figure kitchen remodel over a single cup of coffee. My wife of 23 years, co-founder of our company. And apparently, the person who had just rehearsed that sentence enough times to deliver it without blinking while standing in the wreckage of our marriage. I want to stop here for a moment because if I don't explain something now, none of what comes next will make sense. A foundation doesn't fail because of one bad pour. It fails because someone keeps loading weight onto a crack they already knew was there. I'd been looking at that crack for 3 months and telling myself the structure was still sound. My name doesn't matter, yet you'll learn it soon enough. What matters is what I do for a living. I'm 53 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years running a residential renovation company in Las Vegas. I've torn open walls in houses worth twice what mine cost and found damage that would make a building inspector lose sleep. Termite galleries hollowed out so deep you could push a screwdriver through a load-bearing stud. Black mold colonies behind shower tile that hadn't been pulled since the Clinton administration. Water damage so advanced the subfloor felt like wet cardboard under your boots. But none of that prepared me for what I found inside my own walls. Not the literal ones. The ones Lorraine and I had built around a life that looked so solid from the outside that our neighbors called us the model couple. The walls I'm talking about were made of 15 years of shared bank accounts, a company with both our names on the door, and a house in Summerlin West that we'd bought as a shell and turned into something worth $850,000. Standing in that kitchen, with dust still floating through the headlight beams, I did something that surprised even me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and checked one notification. The security camera app. The one connected to the camera she didn't know about. the one hidden in the smoke detector housing above the stove, angled to capture exactly the kind of moment that was happening right now. Recording. Red dot steady. Every second archived. I put the phone back in my pocket. I didn't say a word. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to confront her, to demand an explanation, to ask her why. But I've torn out enough rotten framing in my career to know the worst thing you can do when something is badly broken is start swinging a hammer out of anger. You assess, you document, you build your case before you build anything else. I picked my truck keys out of the debris on the counter. Grit scraped under my palm. I walked past Lorraine without looking at her, stepped through the garage, climbed into my truck, and backed down the driveway. In the rearview mirror, she was already on the phone. Not crying, not shaking. Standing in the wreckage, with the composure of someone following a script she'd written weeks ago. And that was when I understood this wasn't rage, this was planned. Every piece of it. And whatever she was about to tell the person on the other end of that call, it was going to be a version of tonight that I wouldn't recognize. But to understand what she was planning, you need to know who we were before the wall came down. But she wasn't always the woman standing in rubble with a phone in her hand. And that's the part that makes this harder to tell. Because before the crash, before the lies, before any of it, Lorraine Holbrook was the best partner I ever had. Not just in marriage, in work, in the kind of daily, unglamorous grind that turns a borrowed truck and a rented storage unit into something with your name on the door. We started Holbrook and Holbrook Renovations in 2010 with $11,000, a table saw I'd owned since my 20s, and a stack of business cards Lorraine designed herself at the kitchen table of our apartment. I handled the field framing, demo, electrical rough-ins, the kind of work that leaves sawdust in your coffee and joint compound under your fingernails for days. She handled everything else. Books, permits, clients. The conversations I didn't have the patience for. The handshakes I didn't have the wardrobe for. The follow-up calls I would have forgotten to make. She could walk into a room of strangers and walk out with a signed contract. I could walk into a gutted house and walk out with load-bearing walls standing true. We never competed. We completed. That first summer. We bought the house in Summerlin West. It was a shell, popcorn ceilings, original plumbing, a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the 90s. I told Lorraine I'd renovate it room by room, starting with the kitchen. I need you to understand who she was before I tell you what she became. Because if I make her a monster from the start, I'd be lying to you. And this story only works if you know the truth. She brought me water every afternoon that July while I framed the bay window. 112 degrees outside. She'd stand in the doorway holding a glass with ice already melting, watching me check the level for the third time. And she'd say, "You're going to make this the most beautiful room in the house." She was right. I did. And 15 years later, she drove a Chevy Tahoe through it. The company grew the way good renovations grow, one satisfied client telling the next. By 2013, we had a real office in Spring Valley. By 2015, we landed our first major project, a historic home in Henderson that needed everything from foundation work to a full roof replacement. The budget was north of $200,000. And when the homeowner threatened to walk over a cost overrun on the electrical, I thought we were done. Lorraine drove to that client's house alone. I stayed on the job site, pacing between the framing and the porta-john, drinking coffee from a thermos that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. An hour later, I heard her heels clicking across the gravel before I saw her. She was holding a signed change order, not just the original scope, but an expanded one. She'd talked the client into adding a guest suite. "We'll always be a team." "Garrett," she said, handing me the paper. "That's why this works." I believed her. Not because I was naive, because she'd earned it. Every wall I built, she sold. Every client I impressed with the craft she'd already won with the conversation. For a decade, The math held. Model homes look perfect from the curb, but nobody lives in them. And that's what we became somewhere along the way. A model couple, in a model business, with a model house. And I was too busy hanging drywall to notice when the foundation underneath started to shift. The company crossed 7 figures. Our combined assets, the house, the business equity, and investment property, climbed past 2.47 million. People in the Las Vegas renovation community pointed to us at industry dinners and used words like inspiring and partnership goals. But Lorraine started attending those dinners without me. Networking breakfasts I heard about after the fact. Invest meetings she mentioned in passing and never explained. I didn't question it. She was the business face, I was the craft. That had always been the deal. I should have questioned it. Somewhere between the year we crossed 7 figures and the night she drove through the kitchen, Lorraine stopped seeing us as a team and started seeing the company as something she deserved to own alone. I just didn't know it yet. The first sign didn't come from her. It came from a number on a spreadsheet I was never supposed to see. And the man who showed it to me had been keeping our books clean for 12 years. When does suspicion start with the first lie? Or with the moment you finally stop pretending you didn't hear it? The man who showed me that spreadsheet was Boyd Ramsey, 46 years old, our senior accountant for the past 12 years. Boyd could spot a misaligned decimal the way I spot a crooked stud quietly, without drama, but with the kind of certainty that makes you stop what you're doing and pay attention. He wasn't the type to gossip or speculate. So when he walked into my office in late February with his laptop open and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, I knew he wasn't there to chat. But before I get to what Boyd showed me, I need to tell you what was happening at home. Because the numbers only confirmed what I'd already been feeling in my chest for weeks. That low-grade hum of something being off. Like standing in a room where the HVAC is cycling wrong and you can't quite place the sound. It started with the phone. Lorraine had always been the kind of person who left her phone face up on the dinner table. Volume on. Answering calls mid-bite if a client needed something. That was who she was available. Responsive. Always closing. But in February, the phone started going face down, every meal, every evening. And the calls she used to take at the kitchen table moved to the patio. Then to the car. Then to rooms I wasn't in. Who was that? I asked one night, watching her walk back from the hallway. Just a vendor, she said, already pulling her chair in. Nothing worth repeating. Nothing worth repeating. I let it go. I let it go the way you let a hairline crack go when it shows up on a fresh pore you tell yourself it's surface level. Cosmetic. Probably just shrinkage from the cure. In renovation, we call it hairline cracking. Barely visible, easy to paint over. But it always means something underneath has shifted. She started coming home later. Not dramatically 30 minutes here, an hour there. Client dinners she hadn't mentioned on our shared calendar. A networking event I found out about from a subcontractor who'd seen her there. Each thing by itself was nothing. Lorraine had always been the social engine of the business. But the pattern, the phone, the late arrivals, the conversations that ended when I entered the room was starting to form a shape I didn't want to name. Then Boyd walked in. He set his laptop on my desk, turned the screen toward me, and pointed to a single line on the quarterly ledger. A consulting fee, $34,000, paid in one transfer to an entity called Crestline Advisory Group. No invoice on file, no vendor history, no board discussion. Just Lorraine's authorization signature on the wire approval. I'm not saying anything's wrong, Boyd said. His voice careful the way it always was when he was saying something that mattered. But this doesn't match any vendor I've ever processed. And she signed off without running it through the usual channel. I looked at the number. $34,000 to a company I'd never heard of, approved by the woman I'd trusted with every dollar we ever earned. And I want you to understand that number alone didn't scare me. What scared me was that she'd made sure I wouldn't see it. The payment had been routed through a secondary operating account we rarely reviewed. Time to clear during a week when I was on a job site in Henderson, from sunrise to sundown. If Boyd hadn't been running a quarterly reconciliation early, it would have buried itself in the ledger like rebar in wet concrete, invisible until someone cut into the slab. "I'll handle it," I told Boyd. He nodded, closed his laptop with a quiet click, and left my office without another word. That was Boyd. He delivered the facts and trusted you to do the right thing with them. I sat there for a long time after he left. Coffee going cold in a mug I'd stopped tasting. My thumb pressing a scrap of drywall tape I'd pulled off my desk, where I'd written 2 words: Crestline Advisory. I didn't confront Lorraine that night. I sat across from her at dinner and watched her eat with her phone face down beside her plate. I said nothing, because I've been in this business long enough to know what you do when you find rot behind a wall you weren't expecting. You don't start tearing everything apart in a panic. You open up more of it, you trace the damage, you figure out how deep it goes before you pick up a single tool. I wrote the name Crestline Advisory Group on that scrap of tape and stuck it in my wallet. It meant nothing to me, yet. But within 2 weeks, I'd hear that name again, in a context that made my stomach drop. I asked her about the money the way you'd ask about a crack you already suspect goes deeper than the paint casually, so the wall doesn't know you're testing it. It was a Tuesday in early March. Dinner was reheated pasta neither of us had the energy to cook properly. I waited until she'd poured her second glass of wine before I brought it up. "That Crestline line item Boyd flagged," I said, keeping my fork moving. 34,000 is a big number for a consultant I've never met. What's the scope? She didn't flinch. I'll give her that. Lorraine set her fork down with the kind of deliberate calm that used to impress me in client meetings and said, "It's a growth opportunity, Garrett. Someone who could help us scale the commercial side. I didn't think it needed a committee." "What's his name?" She pushed back from the table. Not fast, slow. The way she did everything when she wanted you to feel like the conversation was beneath her. "I've got a dozen emails to answer tonight. We can talk about it when there's something worth showing you." She walked out of the kitchen. Not a slam. Not a raised voice. Just the sound of her heels on the tile fading toward the home office, and the faint buzz of her phone already in her hand before she'd cleared the hallway. The pasta sat on her plate, untouched. The wine glass still half full, and the desert air drifted through the cracked window, smelling like dust and cooling asphalt. When someone leaves a conversation before it starts, they're not avoiding the question. They're telling you the answer is something you're not supposed to hear. I sat at that table for a long time. I replayed her words: growth opportunity, scale the commercial side. Didn't think it needed a committee. Every phrase was a load-bearing beam designed to hold up a story without actually supporting any weight. She hadn't given me a name. She hadn't given me a deliverable. She'd given me the kind of pitch you give a buyer who doesn't know the house has foundation problems. Broad strokes, warm language, and a quick exit before the questions get specific. 3 days later, she did something I didn't expect. She came home early. Opened a bottle of the wine we used to drink during our first year in business, and sat down next to me on the couch with a softness I hadn't seen in months. She started talking about the early days of the storage unit, the first truck, the jobs we almost lost because we were underbidding every contractor in Clark County. "Remember when we ate pad thai on the office floor because we couldn't afford furniture yet?" she said, laughing in a way that sounded almost real. "You had joint compound in your hair, and I had a client contract in my lap. That was us, for 10 minutes on that couch. Listening to her laugh about takeout containers and crooked business cards, I wanted to be wrong more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. I wanted the payment to be nothing. I wanted her phone to be face down because the screen was cracked, not because the messages on it would crack something else. I wanted the woman sitting next to me to be the same one who'd brought me water in a 112-degree kitchen 15 years ago. Then her phone buzzed in the other room. She touched my arm, said she'd be right back, and left the couch. The laptop was still open on the coffee table. I didn't plan to look. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't snooping. I was sitting there with a glass of wine that had gone sour from sitting too long, staring at nothing. And the screen was just there. A banking portal. Our company's secondary operating account, the same one Boyd had traced the first payment through. And the number on the screen wasn't the one Boyd had shown me. It was 6 figures. A transfer to the same recipient. Crestline Advisory Group. Dated 3 days before Boyd had ever flagged a thing. My hand gripped the edge of the couch cushion so hard, the seam pressed a line into my palm. This wasn't a one-time consulting fee. This was a pattern, and the piece I'd found first was not the beginning. It was just the first one I'd happened to see. I heard her footsteps in the hallway. I looked away from the screen. She came back. Closed the laptop with one hand, like she was shutting a medicine cabinet, and picked up her wine. "Where were we?" she said. "Pad thai on the floor," I said. She smiled. I didn't. She'd made at least 2 transfers to a company that didn't exist in any vendor file we kept, totaling well into 6 figures. And the earliest one predated the moment I'd started paying attention. Whatever Lorraine was building behind my back. She'd been pouring the foundation long before I noticed the ground had shifted. The transfers to Crestline were still circling in my head when I called Dean Mercer from a job site parking lot on my lunch break. He listened without interrupting. That was Dean. 55 years old. A civil litigation attorney downtown who'd once told me the best defense in any dispute is patience backed by paperwork. He'd handled our company's contract disputes for years, and I'd never heard urgency in his voice until that afternoon. "Come in this afternoon," he said. 4 words. No explanation. When your lawyer skips the small talk and asks you to drive across town, you don't finish your sandwich. You go. Dean's office smelled like stale coffee and old case files. He was standing behind his desk when I walked in, suit jacket off, reading glasses pushed up the way men our age do when they've been staring at something too long. He didn't sit down, so neither did I. "People are asking me about your company's new direction," he said. "Investors I know casually, a commercial broker I played golf with last month. They're asking about Holbrook and Holbrook, like there's movement happening, partnerships, expansion, restructuring. I didn't know you had a new direction. That's the problem." I felt the floor shift under me, the way it does on a job site when you step on subfloor that's already delaminated the wood holds. But something underneath gives just enough to let you know the structure isn't what it looks like from above. In my line of work, when a foundation shifts, you don't always hear it. Sometimes the only sign is that the doors stop closing right. Everything looks fine until you try to shut something that used to fit. "I don't have a new direction," I said. "Then someone's creating one without you." Dean picked up a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago and took a sip anyway. "Pull every contract filed in the last 6 months. Read every page yourself. Don't trust summaries. If something's moving under you, the paperwork will show it before the people do." I drove back to the office and waited. The crew left at 5. The foreman locked up the tool crib at 5:30. By 6, the building was empty. Just the fluorescent lights buzzing over the front desk and the hum of the server closet in the back hallway. I pulled the filing cabinet open, the metal drawer sliding out with a sound that echoed off the empty walls, and started reading. Contracts, vendor agreements, change orders, insurance renewals. I went through every folder from October through March, page by page, the way Dean told me to, not scanning, reading. Most of it was routine. Jobs I recognized, numbers I'd approved, signatures that matched the workflow I'd built over 15 years. Then I found it. 3rd drawer, 2nd folder from the back. Filed between a plumbing subcontractor agreement and a materials invoice for a Henderson project. A draft equity transfer agreement. 14 pages. Legal language dense enough to need a machete. And on the last page, in blue ink, Lorraine's preliminary signature the same looping L she'd used on every contract since 2010. How do you describe the feeling of reading your wife's signature on a document that gives away nearly half of everything you built together to someone whose name you don't even recognize? I can tell you it doesn't feel like anger, not at first. It feels like swallowing against nothing. Dry mouth, no water nearby. Your throat closing around air that suddenly tastes like toner and old paper. 40%. She had signed away 40% of our company to an individual I had never approved, never discussed, never been told existed in our orbit. The contract was preliminary, unsigned by the receiving party. No notarization, no filing stamp. But the intent was unmistakable. This wasn't a consultation. This wasn't a growth opportunity. This was an ownership transfer. Drafted in language designed to survive a courtroom challenge. The name on the receiving line nagged at me. I read it 3 times. It sat at the edge of my memory, like a face you've seen in a crowd but can't attach to a conversation. I knew I'd encountered it somewhere. Maybe in an email Lorraine had left open. Maybe in a name dropped at one of those industry dinners she'd attended without me. I just couldn't place it yet. I photographed every page with my phone, the screen cold against my palm in the empty office. I slid the original back into the drawer exactly where I'd found it, between the plumbing sub and the materials invoice, and I closed the cabinet without a sound. I drove home in silence. Lorraine was already in bed. The name kept circling in my head like a loose bolt rattling inside a wall cavity. I knew it was there. I just couldn't reach it yet. But I would. And when I finally placed it, everything I thought I understood about my marriage would collapse into a shape I never saw coming. I've priced hundreds of jobs in my career, square footage, material costs, labor hours, but I'd never had to sit down and calculate the dollar value of my own life falling apart. That name on the equity contract was still rattling around my skull when I sat down at the kitchen table past midnight, with a legal pad and a pen. Lorraine had been asleep for 2 hours. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming its low, steady note. The same sound it had made every night for 15 years, back when that sound meant home instead of evidence. I started writing the way I start every renovation estimate. Line by line. No emotion, just numbers. The house. We'd bought it as a shell and turned it into something the neighborhood pointed at. Last appraisal had it north of $850,000, and that was before I'd redone the master bath with the Italian tile Lorraine picked out from a catalog she'd dog-eared like a novel. The company. Holbrook and Holbrook Renovations. 15 years of contracts, 3 trucks, a warehouse of tools, and a reputation in the Las Vegas renovation market that took a decade to build and could collapse in a season. Conservatively, the equity was worth $1.2 million if you counted the active contracts. The equipment, and the goodwill that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but keeps the phone ringing. The investment property on Tropicana we'd bought 3 years ago as a flip that turned into a rental. $420,000, based on the last comparable sale in the building. I added it up 3 times because I didn't want to believe the number. $2.47 million. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because I had to sit with it for 6 hours in the dark. That's not abstract wealth. That's the house you wake up in. The trucks your crew drives to job sites at 6 in the morning. The property that pays for itself every month. It's the sum total of every early morning. Every blown deadline you stayed late to fix. Every client you talked off a ledge when the tile was back-ordered and the plumber didn't show. And someone whose name I still couldn't place had a preliminary contract to walk away with 40% of it, with my wife's signature already in blue ink on the last page. I set the pen down hard enough to dent the legal pad. The coffee from dinner sat untouched on the counter, cold and bitter smelling, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on drywall dust for hours. I looked down the dark hallway toward the bedroom. Lorraine was asleep, breathing steady, sleeping the kind of deep, unbothered sleep that belongs to someone who isn't lying awake calculating losses. That told me everything I needed to know about who was worried and who wasn't. Every instinct I had wanted to walk down that hallway, turn on the light, and put the photographs of that contract on the bed between us. Ask her to explain. Make her look me in the eyes and tell me who this person was, and why she'd signed away our company without a single conversation. But I've torn out enough rotten framing in my career to know what happens when you start demolition before you understand the full scope of the damage. You bring down the parts of the structure that were still holding everything together. You turn a repair into a total loss. So I made a decision at that kitchen table that would define everything that came after. I would not confront. I would not accuse. I would keep opening up the wall quietly, carefully, one section at a time, until I knew exactly how deep the rot went and where it ended. And then I would act, not out of anger, out of certainty. I folded the legal pad pages, walked them out to my truck in the driveway, and locked them in the glove box. The night air was cool for late March in Vegas, dry enough to taste the dust on it. I went back inside, brushed my teeth, and lay down next to Lorraine in the dark. I didn't sleep, but I lay perfectly still, breathing at her rhythm, the cool sheets against my skin, and the faint scent of her shampoo on the pillow beside me. The same scent that used to mean comfort, and now meant something I couldn't name yet. The alarm went off at 6. She got up, showered, kissed my forehead on her way out the door like nothing had changed. And maybe for her, nothing had. But for me, every second from that morning forward was a measured act. The first thing I was going to do was drive downtown and make it official with Dean Mercer. Because whatever was coming, I wasn't going to face it without a plan. I walked into Dean's office that Thursday morning with a folder of photocopied contracts, a legal pad full of midnight math, and the kind of calm that only comes from having already decided you're going war. Dean cleared his desk without being asked. He set down his coffee, pushed aside a stack of depositions, and said, "Show me everything." So I did. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a renovation scope for a client who needed to understand just how bad the damage was before we talked about price. The payments to Crestline Advisory Group. First the one Boyd found, then the larger transfer I'd glimpsed on the laptop. The draft equity contract giving 40% of our company to a name neither of us recognized. The behavioral shifts, the hidden phone, the unexplained absences, the conversations that ended when I entered rooms, and the total I'd calculated at the kitchen table, every asset tied to the marriage and the business, added up 3 times in the dark. Dean read through the contract photographs, one page at a time, his pen clicking against the desk, in a rhythm I'd come to recognize over the years as his version of thinking out loud. The afternoon sun cut through the blinds and striped shadows across his desk, and the fresh coffee he'd poured sat between us untouched, going cold the way coffee does in rooms where nobody's thinking about drinking. "This isn't a business disagreement, Garrett," he said, setting the last page down. "This is someone repositioning assets before filing. She's 3 moves ahead of you." The words landed like a level dropping on concrete. I'd been thinking of this as a betrayal. Emotional. Personal. The kind of wound that hurts because of who inflicted it. Dean was telling me it was architecture. Lorraine wasn't acting out of passion or impulse. She was executing a plan with the same precision she'd used to build our client base for 15 years. He treats your problem the way a surgeon treats a wound. He doesn't ask if it hurts. He asks how deep it goes. "How far ahead?" I asked. "Far enough that if you confront her tonight, she'll have a restraining order on your desk by Friday, and a narrative that paints you as the threat." I let that sink in. The leather chair creaked under me as I shifted forward. The room smelled like old case files and the binding glue of legal volumes that hadn't been opened in years. My mouth tasted like the metallic edge of adrenaline held in check, not fear. Exactly. But the chemical awareness that something irreversible was happening. "I need you to represent me," I said. Dean nodded once. No hesitation. He stood, extended his hand across the desk, and I shook it, firm, decisive. The kind of grip that means the conversation just became a contract. Then he sat back down and gave me 3 rules. 1, he said, holding up a finger. You don't confront her. Not tonight, not next week, not when she does something that makes your blood boil at 3 in the morning. You say nothing. I want you to understand something about what Dean told me that day, because it changed the way I handled every single moment that came after. 2, you don't move a single dollar out of any joint account. Not into savings, not into your truck's glove box, not under the mattress. Every dollar stays exactly where it is, because the second you touch the money, she tells a judge you're hiding assets and suddenly you're the one explaining yourself. 3, you don't give her anything she can photograph, record, or testify about. Not a raised voice, not a slammed door, not a text message you wouldn't want read aloud in a courtroom. Nothing. He leaned back and let the silence do the work for a moment. The air conditioner hummed its low, steady note. In these cases, Dean continued, the person who loses control first usually loses the case. She's building something. Your job right now is to let her build it while we document every brick she lays. And then we show the judge the blueprint. He stood again, walked me to the door, and said the line I'd carry with me through every sleepless night and silent dinner and carefully measured breath that followed. Don't let her turn you into the villain first. That's not just advice, that's the whole strategy. I drove back across town with his 3 rules running through my head like a checklist before a concrete pour. Don't confront. Don't move money. Don't react. I could do that. I'd spent my whole career staying calm when structures came down around me. But what I didn't know yet was that Lorraine had already sensed something shifting in me, and she was about to start moving faster than either Dean or I had planned. 4. Have you ever lived in a house with someone who's pretending just as hard as you are, and both of you know it, and neither of you says a word? That's what April looked like. Lorraine sensed something had changed in me. I could tell by the way she stopped asking about my day, the way her eyes tracked me a half-second longer when I walked into a room, like she was measuring whether I'd figured it out yet. I held Dean's 3 rules like a plumb line and didn't let myself drift. No confrontation. No reaction. Nothing. But she was drifting plenty. The phone calls moved outside permanently. Every evening. Sometimes twice. She'd walk past me in the kitchen with her phone already to her ear and step onto the back patio like I wasn't standing 3 feet away. Not hiding, exactly. Performing. The way you perform normalcy when you've already decided the person watching doesn't matter enough to bother with a convincing lie. Through the kitchen glass, I could see her silhouette pacing the flagstone. Her voice muffled into nothing but rhythm urgent, low, the cadence of planning rather than conversation. Then the office door got a lock. In 15 years, that door had never had more than a friction latch. I know because I installed the hardware myself when we moved in. But one evening I reached for the handle and felt resistance. A deadbolt. New. The brass still shiny. She'd bought the cheapest one on the shelf. The kind with a keyway so loose you could pick it with a flathead screwdriver. That detail hurt more than it should have. Not the lock itself, but the fact that she'd walked into a hardware store and grabbed the first deadbolt she saw, instead of asking me which brand to get the way she would have a year ago, without thinking. It was the smallest gesture of separation I'd ever seen, and it told me more than any bank transfer could. She wasn't just hiding things from me. She was building walls inside our house. And she was doing it with cheap materials because she didn't plan on staying long enough for them to matter. I ate dinner across from that locked door every night and said nothing. Dean's voice played in my head like a loop. Don't give her anything she can photograph, record, or testify about. So I chewed. I swallowed. I watched the news. And I went to bed at a reasonable hour, while my wife whispered to someone on the patio, and the desert air carried the sound away before I could catch a single word. Then came the restaurant. It was a Wednesday. I was driving back from a supply run, westbound on Flamingo, when I passed an off-strip place mid-range, dim lighting. The kind of restaurant where people go when they don't want to be seen by anyone they know. Lorraine's car was in the lot. White Tahoe. Personalized plate frame from the dealership where we'd bought it together. She'd told me that morning she had a late client meeting in Henderson. Henderson is 20 minutes east. This restaurant was 15 minutes west. The geography didn't hold. I parked 2 rows back under a busted lot light and walked close enough to see through the front window. The booth was near the back, but the angle was clear. Lorraine was sitting across from a man I'd never been introduced to, mid-40s, dark sport coat. The kind of posture that belongs to someone who's comfortable in expensive restaurants and comfortable with the woman sitting across from him. Her hand was on his forearm. Not a handshake, not a business gesture. The kind of touch that has history behind it, that says this isn't the first time and it won't be the last. My chest did something it had never done on a job site. It seized, a fist closing around my sternum from the inside. The restaurant's kitchen exhaust drifted across the parking lot, warm grease and garlic mixing with the dry desert night. And I stood there breathing it in while my wife touched another man's arm 20 feet away through a pane of glass. I took 4 photographs with my phone. The screen was warm under my thumb as I zoomed in on each one. His face was half turned in every shot. Not enough to identify clearly, but enough to know he wasn't anyone from our world. And yet something about the way he held his glass, the angle of his shoulders, tugged at the same place in my memory as the name on that equity contract. 2 puzzle pieces that belonged together. I just couldn't see the full picture yet. I got back in my truck and drove home at exactly the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2. Breathing the way I breathe when I'm cutting a load-bearing header and there's no room for the saw to slip. Within days, I would install cameras that would eventually capture everything. The next morning I drove to a security supply store on Decatur Boulevard and bought 4 cameras, 2 junction boxes, and enough cable to wire every angle of a house I wasn't sure I'd be living in much longer. I told Lorraine about the break-ins 2 streets over when I got home. Told her I wanted to upgrade security, standard precaution, nothing unusual. She barely looked up from her phone. "Fine, whatever you think," she said. The way you wave off a waiter offering more water. A year ago she would have asked which brand, what resolution, where they'd be mounted. Now she didn't care. Or she didn't want to know. Either way, it told me something. I spent the afternoon drilling mounts into stucco and running cable through the soffit kitchen bay window, driveway approach, back patio, and a view of the hallway that caught her office door. The stucco dust mixed with silicone sealant on my fingers as I seated each bracket, and I worked with the same care I'd use on a client's house. Maybe more. The kitchen camera got the most attention. I angled it to capture the full width of the bay window and 6 feet of floor in every direction, adjusting twice until the feed on my phone showed exactly what I needed. I want you to understand I positioned that camera the way you check your rearview mirror when you feel someone tailgating. Not because you know something's coming, but because you know you'd never forgive yourself if it did and you weren't ready. I didn't know yet what that camera would record, but I knew that if something happened in that kitchen, the room I'd built with my own hands, the room that anchored every memory of the life we'd shared, I wanted every second of it archived. The click of the last bracket locking into its mount sounded like a deadbolt sliding home. 2 days later, Boyd walked into my office at the Spring Valley location and closed the door behind him. He had his laptop open and a look on his face I'd only seen once before the time he'd found a subcontractor double billing us for materials on a Henderson job. Quiet. Precise. The face of a man who'd found something he wished he hadn't. "I went deeper into the accounts," he said, setting the laptop on my desk. "There's a second transfer. 185,000, same recipient, same shell entity. Crestline Advisory Group. The name I'd been carrying in my wallet on a scrap of drywall tape for weeks. "That's 219 total," I said. The words came out flat, the way numbers do when they've already hit you in the chest before they reach your mouth. "That I've found," Boyd said. "There could be more routed through accounts I don't have access to." I looked at him across the desk. And for exactly 3 seconds, 3 seconds I'm not proud of, I wondered if he was part of it. If the man who'd kept our books clean for 12 years had been helping Lorraine move the money while feeding me just enough breadcrumbs to keep me looking in the wrong direction. I felt ashamed for those 3 seconds of doubt. Boyd had brought the proof before I'd even finished forming the question. That's the kind of loyalty you don't deserve to question even once. He anticipated it anyway. He turned the laptop toward me and walked me through every line Lorraine's digital authorization signature. The IP log showing each transfer was submitted from her home office computer, and a timestamp on the larger payment, 11 p.m. on a Saturday. Boyd pulled up his phone and showed me a photo of his daughter's soccer game that same afternoon. The metadata stamped with the date and time. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice steady and without offense. "And I'd think it too if I were sitting where you are. So there it is, her signature, her IP, her login. On a night I was coaching 8-year-olds in shin guards. I wrote the total on my legal pad. $219,000. Authorized from her own computer. On weekends. Routed to a company that existed on paper and nowhere else. The metallic taste of adrenaline sat on my tongue like a penny held between my teeth. And the name on that shell company's registration, the name I'd been trying to place for weeks. The one that had nagged at me since the filing cabinet and tugged at me again through a restaurant window, was about to walk into my life, wearing a pressed sport coat and a handshake designed to make me believe he was there to help. I broke Dean's first rule that night, not because I lost control, but because some questions eat through your discipline the way moisture eats through drywall. Slow, and then all at once. The confirmed total was still burning in my chest when I sat down across from Lorraine at dinner. I waited until the plates were cleared, and the wine was poured, and the kitchen was quiet enough that there was nowhere for either of us to hide behind noise. Then I said it. $219,000 to Crestline Advisory. I checked with Boyd. There's no invoice, no contract I approved, and no discussion between us. Help me understand what it's for. I said it the way you'd point out a crack to a homeowner, calm. Factual, no emotion. Just the observation and the question behind it. I wanted to give her a chance to explain. Part of me, the part that still remembered the early years, the takeout on the office floor. The woman who brought me water in a 112-degree kitchen was praying she would. Praying she'd say something that made the numbers make sense. That turned the shell company into a misunderstanding and the locked office door into ordinary privacy. She set her wine glass down on the granite with a click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Not a flinch, not a blink. She looked at me the way she looked at subcontractors who questioned her estimates, with the patient annoyance of someone who's already made the decision and considers the conversation a formality. "It's a strategic investment," she said. "Someone who can help us move into commercial renovation. You've been on job sites 12 hours a day. You haven't been tracking the business landscape the way I have. This is what I do. The business landscape. Not our business. Not our company. The business landscape as if it were a territory she surveyed from a height I couldn't reach. 200,000 is a conversation. Lorraine. Not a unilateral decision." She pushed back from the table. The chair scraped against the tile, the same tile I'd laid by hand when we first moved in. And she stood with the controlled posture of a woman who'd already rehearsed this moment. "You don't need to understand every decision I make," she said. "You never needed to before. The difference is now you're choosing to question it." She walked out of the kitchen the way you walk away from a house you've already decided to sell, without looking back at what you're leaving behind. Her footsteps faded down the hallway, and her perfume hung in the air for a few seconds after she was gone. thinning until the kitchen smelled like nothing but cooling food and the faint desert dust that always crept through the window seals this time of year. I sat there. The wine had gone bitter on my tongue. Or maybe it had always been bitter, and I'd only now stopped pretending otherwise. Every pronoun had shifted without me noticing, and now that I heard them all at once, the structure of our marriage sounded exactly like a building where someone had quietly removed every shared load-bearing wall. My job sites. Her decisions. The business not ours. Not the thing we'd built together from a storage unit and a single truck, but a landscape she navigated alone, while I swung hammers and trusted her with the money. She didn't say our company. Not once. I put my palm flat on the counter, the same spot where we'd once spread out our first business plan on a sheet of butcher paper, down the company logo with a Sharpie while the sun went down. The granite was cold. I pulled out my phone and texted Dean one line. She's not hiding anymore. She's telling me to my face. Then I stood up to clear the dishes. And on my way to the sink, I passed the hallway bench by the front door. Lorraine's purse was sitting there with the clasp open. She never left it open. Never. Not in 23 years of knowing a woman who organized her handbag the way I organized a tool belt. Inside, the corner of a legal envelope was visible. Cream-colored stock, the kind law firms use. The return address was a family law practice on Charleston Boulevard, a building I'd driven past 1,000 times on the way to job sites without ever needing to know what was inside it. The intake date stamped on the envelope's label was February 12th. She hadn't just been thinking about leaving. She'd started the paperwork 3 months before I'd even noticed the phone going face down at dinner. I pulled that envelope out of her purse the way you pull a nail from a stud you're about to tear out slowly. Knowing what you'll find behind it won't be pretty. The letterhead belonged to a family law firm on Charleston Boulevard. High-asset divorces. Business valuations. Contested property divisions, the kind of practice that advertises on billboards near the courthouse and charges by the quarter hour. Inside, I glimpsed a consultation summary with Lorraine's name printed across the top and a case intake date in bold type near the margin. February 12th. The same week I first noticed her phone going face down at dinner. Every sign I thought I'd been catching early: the hidden calls, the locked office door, the transfers I'd traced through Boyd. She'd been 2 full steps ahead the entire time. I'd been following a trail she'd already walked. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Business valuation pending." Someone at that firm was already calculating what our company was worth. Not for growth, not for partnership, but for division. February 12th. Valentine's week. She'd walked into a divorce lawyer's office while I was probably picking up flowers on the way home from a job site. Something about that timing made it worse. Not the betrayal itself. I've been living with that for weeks. The precision of it, the calendar awareness. The cold scheduling of destruction while the person you're destroying is still buying you roses. I slid the envelope back into the purse, adjusted the clasp to the angle it had been, and stepped away without touching anything else. In renovation, you learn to put things back exactly the way you found them, when you're not ready for the homeowner to know you've been inside the wall. My hands were steady. My chest wasn't, but my hands were steady, and that's what mattered. The next morning, I drove to a Henderson job site and did the only thing that has ever made my mind go quiet when the rest of me is screaming. I picked up a sledgehammer and went to work. The bathroom in that house needed to come down to Stud's old tile. Rotten backer board. A shower pan that had been leaking into the subfloor for a decade. I swung through it for 3 hours straight. The tile shattered in patterns that reminded me of the bay window glass I'd eventually see scattered across my own kitchen floor. Though I didn't know that yet. Old plaster and mildew filled the air. And between each swing, the vibration traveled up my forearms and settled somewhere in my shoulders like a current grounding itself. There's a reason I've always done my best thinking with a sledgehammer in my hands. When your body is moving through controlled destruction, your mind gets quiet enough to build something in the background. And what I was building that afternoon between loads of debris hauled to the dumpster. Between gulps of water from a warm bottle that tasted like plastic and dust was a timeline. Her timeline. I sat on the tailgate during a break and pulled out my phone. Photo by photo, I organized everything I had. The equity contract from the filing cabinet. The bank authorization logs Boyd had shown me. The restaurant photographs. The divorce envelope. 12 pieces of evidence. Arranged chronologically. The way I'd lay out a punch list before final inspection. February through April. 2 months of coordinated movement, financial, legal, person, all running in parallel while I ate dinner across from her every night. And said nothing, because a lawyer told me not to. By the time I loaded the last sheet of old drywall into the dumpster, the Henderson sun was dropping behind the ridge, and my shirt was soaked through. I sat on the warm metal tailgate and felt something shift inside me. Not anger anymore. Something colder. There's a moment on every renovation project when you stop hoping a wall can be saved and start planning the teardown. You stop measuring for repair and start measuring for removal. That's where I was not grieving the marriage anymore, but calculating the demolition. I sent the full evidence file to Dean that night with one line. Everything I have, organized by date. She's been ahead of me since February. His reply came in under a minute. Good. Now stop collecting and start preparing, because, based on what you've shown me, she's going to make a move soon, and when she does, it won't be paperwork. It'll be something you can't put back together. I read that message twice in the dark of my truck cab. The phone buzzing one more time as Dean added a final line. Be ready. He was right. It took her less than 2 weeks. The first thing she took wasn't the house or the company. It was a password. Dean had warned me she'd move fast. He was right. It took less than 2 weeks. I walked into the Spring Valley office on a Monday morning in early May, set my coffee on my desk, and typed my login into the accounting platform the same way I had every workday for 15 years. The screen blinked once and gave me 3 words. Access not authorized. I tried again. Same result. I checked the administrative portal through the company's internal system, and that's where I saw it. My role had been changed. Not co-owner, not managing partner. Field supervisor. A title that existed nowhere in our operating agreement. Nowhere in our articles of incorporation. Nowhere in any document I'd ever signed. Lorraine had submitted the change the previous Friday afternoon, calling it a systems reorganization for efficiency. The office manager told me this, with the apologetic tone of someone delivering news they didn't understand and didn't want to be responsible for. Field supervisor. 15 years of co-ownership reduced to a role that sounded like I worked for someone else in my own company. I sat at my desk, with the dead login screen glowing in front of me, and the coffee I'd brought going cold beside a keyboard that no longer responded to my credentials. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was administrative. The kind of move that looks like paperwork but feels like someone changing the locks while you're still inside the house. I didn't call her. I didn't storm down the hall. I sat there and heard Dean's voice in my head. She's going to make a move. This was it. Quiet. Surgical. The kind of takeover you don't see until you're already standing outside the perimeter. Over the next 2 days, the erosion continued. Vendor contacts I'd maintained for a decade were redirected to Lorraine's email. My name disappeared from the client-facing section of the company website. A new approval chain for purchase orders appeared in the system. Every request now routed through Lorraine directly, bypassing me entirely. She was doing to the company what termites do to a house, hollowing out the structure from the inside, one connection at a time, until the person standing on top doesn't realize the floor is about to give way beneath them. The crew noticed. Of course they did. You can't restructure a small company without the people who swing the hammers feeling the vibration. One of my guys, a framer named Hector who'd been with us 8 years, came to my truck at lunch on Wednesday, leaned in the window, and said it quiet, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Boss, are you selling the company? Because Lorraine told us all purchase orders go through her now. I told him it was a temporary reorg. He nodded. He didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. The sandwich I'd brought sat on the dashboard untouched, the bread gone stale in the May heat. And I watched Hector walk back to the job trailer with the posture of a man who's just been told the foundation is fine while standing on a cracked slab. I called Dean from the parking lot that evening. I told him everything. The login, the title change, the vendor redirects, the purchase order chain. He listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he said one word. Good. I gripped the phone hard enough to feel the case flex. How is any of this good? Because now she's leaving fingerprints, he said. A pattern. Unable restructuring of a co-owned business without board consent. Let her keep going. We'll use all of it. I leaned my head back against the truck's headrest and closed my eyes. The parking lot smelled like asphalt softening in the afternoon heat and the cold coffee I'd never finished that morning. Then Dean said something else before he hung up. Something that kept me awake that night, staring at the bedroom ceiling while Lorraine slept soundly down the hall. Check the camera footage from this weekend. If she's moving this fast on the business side, she's probably coordinating with someone. And I'd like to know who was at your house while you were on that Henderson job site. I waited until she was asleep to pull up the security app on my phone. The kitchen camera had captured Saturday afternoon in full. And there, in the driveway, was a black sedan I'd never seen before. The same color, the same profile as a car I'd noticed once in a restaurant parking lot weeks earlier. Someone had been inside my house, and the footage was about to show me who. I sat in my truck in the driveway at 11 o'clock at night, laptop balanced on the steering wheel, and pressed play on the footage from Saturday afternoon. The black sedan, same color. Same profile as the one I'd spotted at the restaurant weeks ago, pulled into the driveway at 2:14 p.m. I know exactly where I was at 2:14 on Saturday. Standing in a demolished bathroom in Henderson, swinging a sledgehammer at someone else's rotten walls, while a man in a sport coat stepped out of that sedan and walked toward my front door like he already had a key. Lorraine opened the door before he knocked. Not the way you greet a stranger, or even a colleague the way you open a door when you've been watching for the headlights. She stepped aside. He walked in. The driveway camera lost them both for 40 minutes. Then the patio camera picked them up. They were standing on the back flagstone, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He was gesturing at the roofline, the yard, the back fence. The kind of sweep you do when you're showing someone a property you're about to sell, not a home you're visiting. Lorraine stood beside him, nodding, not the way a wife shows off her house to a guest. The way a real estate partner walks a potential investment with a buyer who's already run the numbers. I watched him point at the eave detail I'd framed myself, at the pergola I'd built over the patio the summer we turned 40, at the lot line I'd surveyed with a rented Transit on a Saturday morning 10 years ago. He touched none of it and assessed all of it. My hands tightened on the laptop's edges until the plastic creaked. The patio camera had audio, not clean wind noise. A sprinkler 2 houses over, but enough. Lorraine was on the phone with someone else, her voice pitched low and businesslike. The man leaned in close to her and said something directly into the phone's mic. The camera caught it. After everything's settled, Holbrook and Holbrook won't be Holbrook and Holbrook anymore. I want you to hear what I heard in that moment. Not just the words, but the ownership in his voice when he said my company's name. He dropped it the way you drop a brand you've already acquired and are deciding what to rename. Casual, proprietary, done. I rewound the clip and played it again. Then again. Then a fourth time. Because my brain was doing something it rarely does, matching a sound to a memory I'd almost thrown away. 3 weeks earlier. A Monday morning meeting I'd nearly skipped because I had a materials delivery to inspect. Lorraine had introduced a man she called a potential consultant, someone she said could help us evaluate commercial expansion opportunities. Pressed linen shirt, polite handshake, mid-40s. He said all the right things about growth and market positioning, spoke for 10 minutes, and left. I shook his hand, forgot his face by lunch, and went back to a job site. But I never forget a voice. The cadence was the same, the careful diction, the way he spaced his consonants like a man who'd practiced sounding trustworthy. It was identical. The consultant from the Monday meeting was the man on my patio. The man on my patio was the man from the restaurant. And the man from the restaurant was the name on the equity contract I'd photographed in the filing cabinet weeks ago. 3 puzzle pieces. Same person. The face I couldn't place from the parking lot photos. The name I'd been carrying in my wallet on a scrap of drywall tape. The voice that had just told someone on the phone that my company wouldn't carry my name much longer. All one man. I scrubbed back through the driveway footage and found the frame I needed. The sedan's license plate. Captured in the afternoon sun at a resolution sharp enough to read every digit. I took a screenshot, then pulled up the patio footage one more time and captured a still of his face 3/4 profile. Clear enough for identification. The bile I'd been swallowing for 20 minutes finally settled. I reached for the cold water bottle on the passenger seat, drank half of it, and opened my phone. The message to Dean was one line. Found him. Face, voice, and plate number. All on camera. Dean's reply came in 4 minutes. Sending to my investigator tonight. We'll have a full name by morning. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark truck cab, smelling leather and stale coffee from the cup holder, listening to the neighborhood settle into silence around me. By morning, I'd have a name. But before Dean could trace that plate, Lorraine was going to find one of those cameras. And everything was about to move faster than either of us planned. You ever watch a trap you set for someone spring shut on the wrong side and realize you're the one who just ran out of time? Dean hadn't even traced the plate yet. I was still waiting on the full name, still expecting to wake up to a text that would finally put all the pieces together. Instead, I came home from work on a Wednesday evening and found Lorraine standing in the kitchen holding the patio camera in her right hand, cable dangling from the bracket like a severed nerve. The mount scratched where she'd pried it off the stucco. She set it on the granite counter between us the way you'd set down a card in a game you've already decided you're going to win. Then she leaned against the island and studied me. The silence lasted long enough for the refrigerator compressor to cycle on and off. Desert air drifted through the open patio door where the camera had been, warm and dry and smelling like dust. "How long?" she said. "Long enough. Then you already know this isn't going to end the way you want it to." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't look angry. She looked like a general who just learned the enemy had binoculars inconvenient, but not fatal. The kind of setback that changes the timetable, not the plan. Her eyes moved across my face with the same assessing sweep I'd watched her use on clients for 15 years reading the room. Measuring the resistance, calculating how much pressure to apply and where. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in months, maybe ever. Every layer of pretense stripped away, every polite fiction abandoned. Nothing left between us but the granite countertop and the dismounted camera sitting on it like evidence at a deposition. "You think you built this company with your hands," she said, her voice level and measured. "You built houses, Garrett. I built the business. The clients, the reputation, the contracts, that was me. And the future of this company is someone who understands growth, not someone who measures success in straight walls." I stood there with my tongue pressed against my teeth. Dean's rules running through my head even now don't react. Don't give her anything but one question climbed out before I could stop it. "And this new partner of yours, is he the future? Or is he just the next person you're going to convince he's indispensable until you don't need him either?" Something shifted behind her eyes. Not pain recognition. The kind of flinch you see when a nail gun hits a knot and the fastener bends instead of sinking clean. She recovered in half a second. But I saw it. For one fraction of a moment, she knew I'd described something true about her, and the truth of it registered before she could lock it back down. Then the cold smile came, the one I'd seen her use on contractors who questioned her numbers, the one that said the conversation was over and the decision had already been made. "We don't have much time left then," she said. She turned and walked toward her home office. I heard the deadbolt click, the cheap one she'd installed herself, and then nothing. Just the kitchen, and the dismounted camera on the counter, and the silence that fills a house when two people have finally stopped pretending they're on the same side. I waited until her office light went off an hour later before I checked my phone. 3 camera feeds, all green. The driveway camera still active. Hidden under the Eve letter a junction box painted to match the fascia. The hallway camera still active, mounted flush behind a return air vent cover I'd installed myself. And the kitchen camera. The kitchen camera was the one that mattered. I'd hidden it inside the smoke detector housing above the stove. The same smoke detector I'd wired into the ceiling when we first moved in. Positions to capture every inch of the bay window wall. Lorraine would have to stand on a ladder and unscrew the housing to find it. And even then, she'd have to know what she was looking for. The patio camera was mounted at eye level for a reason. It was the one I expected her to find. The other 3 were positioned the way I position junction boxes in a finished wall flush. Painted over, part of the structure itself. I texted Dean. She found one. She doesn't know about the others. She's going to move fast now. His reply came in 30 seconds. Let her. I put the phone in my pocket and stood in the kitchen, my fingertips resting on the scratched bracket she'd left on the counter. The smoke detector above me hummed its faint electronic hum. The red recording light was hidden behind the sensor grill, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Whatever Lorraine was about to do next, that camera would capture every second of it. I just didn't know yet that what it would record would happen in less than 72 hours. The house had never been quieter than it was that Thursday night. And I'd never been more afraid of silence. 72 hours had shrunk to less than a day. I could feel it. The way you feel barometric pressure dropping before a storm. Nothing visible yet, but the air changes. The weight of it shifts, and everything around you goes still in a way that isn't peaceful. It's the stillness of something about to break. I was lying in the guest bedroom I'd been sleeping in for the past 3 weeks. A room I'd drywalled and painted myself when we first bought the house, back when the idea of sleeping in it alone would have been absurd. The sheets smelled like laundry detergent and nothing else. No trace of the shared life that used to fill every room. Just clean cotton and the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard her voice, muffled, coming through the wall. She was on the phone in the master bedroom, speaking in that low, precise tone I recognized from years of watching her close deals. The voice she used when every word had been chosen in advance, and the conversation was about execution, not discussion. I couldn't make out full sentences, but I caught fragments, the way you catch radio signals driving through a canyon. Enough to assemble a picture. Everything has to happen Friday. A pause, then the filing, the lock change, all of it. Another pause. Longer. I pressed my ear against the drywall I'd hung myself and held my breath. He still thinks this is about the marriage. There's a moment in demolition when you swing the sledgehammer and the wall doesn't break, it just groans, shifting its weight to the studs on either side. And you realize the whole structure is about to come down at once. Not in pieces, all at once. That's what her voice sounded like through that wall. Not a woman having a late-night conversation. A woman running through a checklist with someone who'd already agreed to every item on it. Friday. Lock changes, filing, all of it. And the line that landed hardest, he still thinks this is about the marriage, which meant wasn't. Or rather, the marriage was just one piece of a machine I hadn't fully mapped yet. And tomorrow morning, every gear was going to turn at once. I waited until the call ended. Waited until her light went off and the hallway went dark. Then I moved. The kitchen was black except for the green standby light on the microwave and the faint glow of the smoke detector sensor, the one with the camera inside it that she didn't know about. I opened my laptop on the counter and downloaded the latest footage from all 3 remaining cameras to a flash drive. Every clip, every timestamp. Then I pulled up the evidence file I'd been building for weeks and copied it all. The transfer records, the equity contract, the incorporation documents for the shell company, the restaurant photographs, the audio from the patio. I assembled it the way I'd frame a load-bearing wall. Every piece carrying weight. Nothing decorative. Nothing that couldn't hold up under pressure. 3 copies. 1 on the flash drive for Dean. 1 in the lockbox bolted to the floor of my truck bed. 1 sealed in an envelope I'd drop at the office before dawn. Have you ever sat in your own driveway at 2 in the morning and wondered whether you'd still own it by sundown? I sat in my truck with the engine off and the windows cracked. The May night air carrying the smell of warm concrete and someone's jasmine hedge 2 houses down. The dash clock said 2:07 a.m. I opened my phone and typed 1 message to Dean. If anything happens to me or the company, use the file. Don't wait. His reply came in 90 seconds. At 2 in the morning, as though he'd been sitting up waiting for exactly this message. Already have a motion drafted. Stay steady. Garrett. I read it twice, then locked the phone and looked back at the house. Every window dark, every light off. The structure I'd renovated with my own hands. Sitting there, in the blue-black quiet of a Las Vegas night, looking exactly the way it always had from the outside. Then the bedroom curtain moved. Just an inch. Just enough. A sliver of darkness shifting behind glass. The way a shadow moves when someone steps closer to a window they don't want to be seen standing at. She'd been there, standing in the dark, watching me sit in the truck, watching me send that text. We were both awake. We were both ready. And in less than 18 hours, one of us was going to lose everything. By 9 that morning, we were both sitting at the same conference table, and neither of us had slept. Friday arrived the way a condemned building arrives at its demolition date, the calendar said today. And nothing was going to stop what had already been scheduled. I drove to the Spring Valley office expecting a fight. What I found was worse. Lorraine was already there. Coffee made, lights on. The staff calendar wiped clean and replaced with a single entry, all hands meeting, 10 a.m. I hadn't scheduled it. I hadn't approved it. And sitting on the conference table, centered like a place setting at a dinner I wasn't invited to, was a folder with the Crestline Advisory Group letterhead I'd first seen on Boyd's ledger months ago. "Morning," she said, smiling at me with the warmth she usually reserved for clients about to sign a 6-figure contract. 2 employees stood near the coffee station, watching us the way people watch a traffic light that's stuck between yellow and red. I called a quick team meeting. Just some growth updates. Growth updates. That's what she called dismantling everything I'd built. Funny, I said. I don't remember approving a meeting. Her smile didn't waver. She'd practiced this, every word, every gesture. The way she positioned herself at the head of a table we used to sit at side by side. The office smelled like fresh coffee neither of us had poured. Someone on staff had done it. Not knowing they were setting the table for a war. The meeting started at 10. 4 employees sat along the table, our project manager, our office coordinator, and 2 senior crew leads who'd been with us since the Henderson days. Lorraine stood at the head and delivered her pitch the way she'd delivered 1,000 client presentations, smooth, confident, structured. The company needs fresh capital to move into commercial renovation, she said. I've found an investor willing to acquire a 40% equity stake. The paperwork has already been drawn up. This is the next phase for Holbrook and Holbrook. The room went quiet. Not confused, quiet the heavy. Pressurized quiet. That fills a space when everyone in it understands that something just broke. But nobody knows whose job it is to say so. I could hear the air conditioning cycling through the ceiling vents. The faint buzz of the fluorescent tubes I'd wired myself when we first leased this space. "Drawn up by who?" I said. My voice was level. "Dean's rules, don't react. Don't give her anything." But the question needed to be asked, and it needed to be asked in front of witnesses. Because I never signed thing. I've watched foundations crack before hairline fractures that run from footer to sill plate in a single afternoon. But I'd never watched one crack in a conference room with my name still on the door. 4 employees sat frozen between us. The woman they'd known as the business half of the partnership was proposing to hand nearly half the company to someone none of them had ever met. The man they'd known as the one who built everything they worked on was sitting 3 chairs away, with a dead login and a title that didn't exist in any operating agreement. Lorraine closed the folder. She looked at me across the table with an expression I'd seen 100 times in negotiations. The look that said the conversation was over and the decision had already been made without the other party's consent. Then she leaned in close enough that only I could hear. The staff were already standing, gathering their things, trying to leave a room that felt like it was running out of oxygen. "We'll finish this at home tonight," she said. Not a suggestion, not an invitation. The way she picked up that crestline folder, slow, deliberate, tucking it under her arm like she was holstering something she intended to use, told me tonight wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a detonation. And the kitchen camera hidden in the smoke detector was going to record every second of it. Before I tell you what happened when she came home that night, I need to ask you something. If you've made it this far into this story, drop a prediction in the comments. Do you think she was trying to save the company? Or was she trying to take it? Tell me in 1 sentence. And please know that some details in what follows have been adapted for storytelling purposes. The emotional truth is what matters here. I was still standing in the hallway when she threw the word stalker at me like a brick through glass. The drive home had taken 40 minutes. Lorraine's car was already in the garage. The house was lit up, every light on the ground floor blazing, which she never did. And I understood why, the moment I stepped through the front door. She wanted to be seen. She wanted this on the record. She was standing in the kitchen I'd framed and finished myself. The room with the bay window I'd sweated through a July to install, and she launched into it before I'd set my keys down. Not a conversation, a performance. Every word chosen. Every accusation calibrated, delivered in the clipped, rising tone of someone who's already imagined herself repeating this on a witness stand. "You put cameras in our home," she said, her voice carrying through the open floor plan like she was projecting for a gallery. "You followed me to a restaurant. You went through my purse. You're a stalker. Garrett, that's what the court is going to call you." Stalker. The word landed on the tile between us and sat there. She'd chosen it specifically. Not jealous, not controlling, not any of the words a person uses in an argument. Stalker is a legal word, a word that shows up in restraining order filings and protective order hearings. She wasn't fighting. She was building testimony. Have you ever watched someone you shared a bed with for 23 years rehearse the lie they're going to tell a judge about you? Because that's what I was watching. Every accusation timed, every gesture measured. Her body angled toward the spot where the patio camera used to be, the one she'd already ripped down. She was performing for a recording she thought no longer existed. She had no idea the smoke detector above the stove was capturing every word in a resolution clear enough to read the label on the wine bottle behind her. And what are they going to call someone who moved company funds through a shell company without her partner's consent? I said. Quiet. Level. Dean's voice in my head telling me to stay steady. "You have no proof of anything," she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The proof was hanging 6 feet above her head. Something shifted in her face, the performance cracking for a half second. A flash of something harder underneath. She grabbed her keys from the counter. Not the way you grab keys when you're leaving for a drive. The way you grab a tool when you've decided what you're going to do with it. She walked through the garage door. I heard the SUV start the same Tahoe we'd bought together. The same one she'd driven to client meetings and grocery runs, and the 1,000 ordinary errands that make up a marriage nobody's watching. But the garage door didn't open. The engine revved high, and through the front window I saw her reverse down the side drive and swing into the cul-de-sac. I thought she was leaving. For one breath. I thought she was driving away and this night was going to end with silence and distance and a phone call to Dean in the morning. Then the headlights swung back toward the house. 3 seconds. That's the gap between a headlight beam and a 2-ton SUV at 30 miles an hour. 3 seconds between the moment I saw those twin beams flood through the bay window. The window I'd measured twice and cut once. The window I'd leveled with a 4-foot straight edge while Lorraine brought me water in the heat, and the moment everything I'd built exploded inward. The engine roared. My body moved before my brain caught up, legs pushing sideways, shoulder dropping. Hands reaching for the floor the way you reach for something solid when the ground disappears. The bay window blew inward like it had never existed. Glass first, a curtain of it, sharp and singing through the air. Then the studs. I heard them snap in sequence, a sound like green lumber cracking under a load it was never rated for. Drywall folded. The cabinet I'd hung with 1/4-inch overlay hinges 15 years ago ripped from the wall and hit the tile in a spray of dishes and dust. I hit the floor. The world turned to headlights and chalk and the taste of drywall powder coating my tongue. The engine was still running. I could feel the vibration through the tile against my cheek. Feel the heat of it radiating through the dust cloud filling what used to be my kitchen. And somewhere above me, swinging on a single wire. The smoke detector hung from the ceiling it had been mounted to. The red light behind the sensor grill was still on. Still recording. Every second of what had just happened captured. The first thing I tasted was drywall dust. Chalky, chemical, coating my teeth like wet cement. The smoke detector was still hanging above me. One wire, swinging gently in the settling cloud. The red light behind the sensor grill blinked steady and calm, the way a heartbeat looks on a monitor when the patient doesn't know how close they came. I stared at it for 3 full seconds before I remembered to check whether I was still in one piece. Fingers first, all 10. Then ribs pain on the left side when I breathed deep, but the kind that meant bruised, not broken. I'd fallen hard enough on a renovation site once to know the difference. My forearms were sliced in 3 places from the glass. Blood already running thin lines down to my wrists and dripping onto the tile. The countertop I'd set with Italian porcelain was split clean in half. The 2 pieces hanging at angles like a book left open to the wrong page. 20 years of morning's coffee. Paperwork. Shared breakfasts that became silent breakfasts that became no breakfasts at all. Cracked down the middle. The SUV's hood was 3 feet inside the kitchen. The engine had stopped, but the radiator was ticking, and the smell of coolant and exhaust mixed with the drywall powder still floating in the air. Through the hole where the bay window used to be, I could see the cul-de-sac, the neighbors' porch lights coming on one by one. The quiet Las Vegas evening turning into something that would be talked about at every mailbox for a year. Then the driver's door opened. Let me tell you something about the person you share a life with. You think you know what they're capable of. You think you've seen them at their worst during fights about money, during late nights when the business was bleeding, during the silences that stretch across a dinner table like tape over a crack. But you don't know. Not really. Not until you watch them climb out of the vehicle they just drove through your kitchen wall and start performing. Lorraine stepped out of the Tahoe without a scratch. Not a cut, not a bruise, not a hair displaced. She smoothed her blouse the same gesture, the same automatic motion I'd watched her make before 10,000 client meetings, and walked toward the front of the house. Not toward me. Not to check whether the man she'd been married to for 23 years was alive or dead under a pile of glass and broken studs. Toward the front door. toward the street, toward the audience.
"He threatened me!"
She screamed, her voice pitched high enough to carry across the cul-de-sac. I had to get out. He was going to hurt me. She positioned herself on the front step where the porch light caught her face, where the neighbors, now standing in their driveways, could see the performance she'd been rehearsing since the night before. I watched from inside the wreckage as she pressed her hand to her chest and let her voice break on cue, the same controlled quaver I'd heard her use to talk a skeptical client through a change order. She wasn't panicked. She was closing. Then she turned back toward me. Just for a second. Just long enough to lock eyes through the dust and the hanging wires and the shattered cabinet frames. And she said it low. Low enough that no neighbor would hear. Low enough that only the two of us would know. Say one word and I'll tell them you swung first. A good contractor knows when to stop demolishing and start documenting. You photograph the damage before you touch a single beam. Because the adjuster needs to see exactly what happened and who caused it. That's what I did. I looked up at the smoke detector one more time. Red light steady. Recording every frame of what she'd just said. Every second of her staging. And I made the decision that Dean had been training me to make for months. I said nothing. She wanted words. She wanted an argument, a raised voice, a sentence she could twist into testimony. I gave her silence. I picked my way through the debris, walked through the garage without looking back, climbed into my truck, and back down the driveway, with glass dust still in my hair and blood drying on my forearms. In the rearview mirror, she was already on the phone. Not calling an ambulance, calling the police, building the next layer of the story she'd been constructing since February. The version where she was the victim, and I was the man she'd had to flee from. I drove 12 blocks before I pulled over. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear. From the understanding that the phone call she was making right now was going to turn me into the criminal before I ever got to be the victim. I picked up my phone and dialed the only number that mattered. It happened, I told Dean. Use the file. Do you know how long it takes for a lie to become the official record? I learned that night it takes about 45 minutes. While I drove toward downtown with blood drying on my forearms and drywall dust still in my hair. Lorraine was standing at our front door in a bathrobe she never wore, greeting two Metro officers with tears she'd rehearsed in the bathroom mirror. I know this because I read the police report 3 days later, and every sentence in it was polished like a sales pitch delivered to buyers who'd already decided to close. She told them I grabbed her arm. Let that land for a second. Not that I yelled, not that we argued. She told two armed officers that I put my hands on her and told her she would never leave that house. She said she ran to the SUV in fear, lost control backing out of the driveway, and struck the side of the house. Property damage from a domestic disturbance, that was the box they checked. The officers photographed the kitchen wall, the shattered bay window, the tire marks on the front walkway. They noted her statement. They wrote down a suspect. And just like that, I went from the man who built that house to the man who terrorized the woman inside it. She gave them a victim. They wrote down a suspect. That is how fast it happens. I have seen load-bearing walls get condemned by inspectors who never touched a hammer. All it takes is one report with the right language, and suddenly the whole structure is marked for demolition. That is what Lorraine did to 23 years of my reputation in 3/4 of an hour. I pulled into the parking garage on 3rd Street before 7 the next morning. Dean Mercer's office was on the 4th floor of a building old enough to have real plaster walls. And when I walked through his door, he looked at me the way a foreman looks at a man who just fell off scaffolding, checking for the injuries I could not see yet. He did not ask what happened. He sat me in the leather chair across from his desk, opened a first aid kit from his bottom drawer, and started cleaning the cuts on my forearms with peroxide and gauze. The peroxide burned. I let it. There was something useful about pain that came from someone trying to help. Before you tell me anything else, Dean said, not looking up from the gauze, The smoke detector. Did the camera survive the impact? I almost laughed. 23 years of marriage ending in wreckage, and his first question was about a device the size of a hockey puck. It was hanging by a wire, I said. The light was still on. Dean set down the gauze and looked at me for the first time since I had walked in. Then we have everything we need. Show me. I pulled the flash drive from my jacket pocket. It had been in there since 2 a.m, when I had pulled the memory card from the dangling camera and transferred the files in the parking lot of a gas station on Tropicana, while my hands were still shaking. Dean turned his laptop toward me. I plugged in the drive. The footage started at 9:47 p.m., kitchen angle, wide shot. The smoke detector housing giving us everything from the island to the bay window. Lorraine walked into frame. She looked directly at the space where the patio camera used to be, the one she had found, and smiled. Then she picked up her phone. What came next played out in a sequence so deliberate it looked choreographed. The accusation. Delivered to an empty room as though practicing for the officers who had not arrived yet. The calm walk to the garage. The headlights swinging across the kitchen window. The acceleration. The impact. Dean watched it twice without speaking. The second time he paused on the frame where the headlights aligned with the bay window, the wall where I had been standing 30 seconds earlier. "That is attempted murder," he said. He said it the way a doctor says the word malignant. No drama, just diagnosis. And just like that, every dollar she had funneled through that shell company became secondary to the fact that she had tried to kill me with a Chevy Tahoe. "We file Monday," Dean said. "Criminal referral and the civil suit together. She will not see it coming because she thinks you ran." I nodded. But Dean was not finished. He rewound the footage to the moment before Lorraine walked out to the garage. She had made one more phone call. The camera angle caught the screen in full clarity. A number, a name, a contact photo. Dean enlarged the frame until the name filled his laptop screen. Vance Prescott. She had called him 90 seconds before she drove a truck through our kitchen wall. Have you ever had a name you suspected confirmed in black ink on a state registration form and wished you had been wrong? That phone call to Vance Prescott before the crash had given Dean a thread to pull, and he pulled it hard. By the following Monday, he had a PI contact run every plate captured on the driveway camera from that Friday night. Most belonged to neighbors. One did not. A black sedan parked 2 houses down on the cul-de-sac, tucked against the curb at an angle that said the driver did not plan to stay long, but wanted to watch. The registration came back in 48 hours. Vance Prescott, age 48. Registered address in Henderson. The same name on the equity contract I had found in Lorraine's desk drawer. The same man whose voice I had matched from the patio footage. The same investor my wife had introduced at a Monday meeting as a consultant who could help with growth. He had been on my street the night she drove a truck through my kitchen wall. He was there, I said. And it came out quieter than I expected. Not a question, a fact settling into its permanent place. Dean pulled the still frame up on his monitor. The sedan was barely visible at the edge of the driveway camera's range. But the plate was legible, and the timestamp read 9:31 p.m., 16 minutes before Lorraine made her performance in the kitchen. 16 minutes before impact. He wasn't just her partner, Dean said. He was her audience. In renovation. We call it a hidden junction the moment you open a wall expecting copper pipes and find the whole plumbing system has been rerouted to a line you never authorized. That is what Dean showed me next. He cleared his desk and laid out a paper timeline, handwritten on yellow legal pad sheets taped end to end. February the first wire to Crestline Advisory Group. March the equity contract. April the restaurant. May the phone call and the crash. 4 months. 4 connections. One man at the center of every single one. I need you to hear this clearly, Dean said, capping his pen. She was not having an affair and separately stealing from the company. Those were not two betrayals. That was one operation. I sat with that sentence for a long time. The affair was the mechanism. The relationship gave Prescott access to our books, our client list, our revenue projections. It gave Lorraine a partner willing to fund the shell company transfers, while she maneuvered the equity contract into position. Every dinner, every hidden phone call, every lie about working late, none of it was passion, it was logistics. "This is not adultery anymore," Dean said. "This is a planned corporate takeover." I had spent months thinking my wife had fallen for another man. The truth was worse. She had recruited one. How do you put a dollar value on 23 years of trust? I can tell you exactly. Because they had calculated it down to the last wire transfer. Every asset I had built, the house, the company, the Henderson property, all of it, had been inventoried, appraised, and divided on a spreadsheet I was never meant to see. The total came to the same number I had calculated during that sleepless night in March, sitting on the kitchen floor with a legal pad. They had known the number too. They had known it first. Dean explained the counterattack in the same tone he used for everything measured, certain, free of drama. File a civil fraud claim against both Lorraine and Prescott. Present the camera footage to the district attorney for criminal charges on the crash. And most urgently, freeze the company accounts before the equity transfer could close. If that contract finalizes before we get a judge's signature, Prescott owns 40%, and you will spend 2 years in litigation buying it back. Dean said, "How long do we have based on the contract date?" "Days, not weeks." Dean reached for his phone to call the courthouse. Before he could dial, his paralegal knocked twice and opened the door holding a manila envelope. No postage, no return address. Hand-delivered to the front desk 10 minutes earlier. Dean opened it with a letter knife and read the single page inside. Then he set it on the desk facing me. It was a signed affidavit from a woman named Sandra Whitmore, claiming she had personally witnessed me strike my wife on 3 separate occasions. Locations, all listed in precise detail. The notary stamp at the bottom was dated 2 weeks before the crash. 2 weeks before. Lorraine had prepared a witness before she ever turned the ignition. The woman who swore she had seen me hit my wife walked into Clark County Family Court wearing shoes that cost more than her story was worth. Sandra Whitmore was maybe 45. Polished in a way that suggested someone had dressed her for the occasion. Cream blouse, gold studs, the kind of careful presentation you put together when you want a judge to see a concerned neighbor and not a hired liar. Lorraine's attorney called her to the stand like she was the final nail in a coffin he had been building for weeks. She delivered her testimony the way a realtor delivers a listing pitch. Smooth, rehearsed, specific enough to sound credible, but vague enough to avoid anything verifiable. She claimed she lived on Ridgecrest Court, 3 houses down from ours. She said she had seen me grab Lorraine by the arm on the front porch in February. That she heard shouting in March. That she watched through her kitchen window in April as I shoved Lorraine against the garage door. 3 dates. 3 incidents. 3 lies so detailed they could have been pulled from a screenplay. I gripped the edge of the defense table so hard my knuckles turned white. Dean placed his hand on my wrist under the table and said one word without looking at me. Wait. I want you to imagine sitting in a courtroom while a stranger you have never met describes violence that never happened. And the only thing keeping you in your chair is your attorney's hand on your wrist and the knowledge that your turn is coming. That is what trust feels like when it costs you everything to hold still. Lorraine sat across the aisle with her hands folded, watching Whitmore testify the way a director watches an actress hit her marks. Satisfied, controlled. Not a flicker of surprise at any detail. Because she had written every one of them. Dean stood for cross-examination the way he did everything, slowly, deliberately, like a man who had already read the last page. Miss Whitmore, you testified you live on Ridgecrest Court in Summerlin West. Can you tell the court your house number? She blinked. It has been a while since I checked the exact number. I know the street. The street, Dean repeated. He opened a folder and placed a single sheet on the podium. Because Clark County property records show no Sandra Whitmore has owned or rented property within a mile of Ridgecrest Court in the last 10 years. The courtroom went quiet. Not dramatic silence, the kind of quiet that settles over a job site when someone pulls a permit and the numbers do not match. Dean was not finished. He asked about the February date, the porch incident she described with such certainty. Then he placed a second document on the podium. A subcontractor invoice from a Henderson renovation, time-stamped and countersigned, confirming I had been on a job site 20 miles away that entire weekend. He followed it with a photo of me on scaffolding at 3:47 p.m., the exact hour Whitmore claimed she watched me assault my wife on our front porch. A bad inspection report has a tell. The numbers are too clean, the margins too perfect. Like someone filled in the blanks without ever setting foot on the site. That was Sandra Whitmore's testimony. A document that looked official until you held it up to the light. "Ms. Whitmore," Dean said, "who asked you to provide this affidavit?" She looked at Lorraine's attorney. He looked at the table. Nobody answered. The judge, a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses perched on her nose and the expression of someone who had heard every lie a courtroom could produce, asked Lorraine's attorney to approach the bench. The conversation lasted 2 minutes. When he walked back, his shoulders had dropped 3 inches and his jaw was set, the way a man's jaw sets when he knows the foundation just shifted under him. The judge looked at Lorraine. Not at her attorney, not at the documents. At Lorraine. It was the first time in the proceedings I had seen doubt in the judge's eyes. And it was pointed directly at my wife. Dean leaned toward me. "That was their best shot," he whispered. "And we have not even shown the video yet." Lorraine sat perfectly still, but I watched her hand close around her phone under the table. The same hand that used to reach for mine when we sat in church or drove through neighborhoods looking for our next renovation project. The judge called a recess until the following Monday. The courtroom emptied in the slow shuffle of people who know something just changed, but cannot name it yet. As Lorraine's attorney pulled her into the hallway, the door swung shut behind them, but not before I heard him say 4 words. "They have a video." Lorraine's face went the same shade of white as the drywall dust that had covered my kitchen floor the night she tried to bury me under it. Dean stood up on Monday morning, buttoned his jacket once, and said the 6 words that ended my marriage. "Your Honor, we have video evidence." Lorraine had spent the weekend preparing. I could see it in the fresh highlights. The tailored navy dress. The posture of a woman who had rehearsed confidence in a bathroom mirror. But preparation only works when you know what is coming. She did not. Her attorney was on his feet before Dean finished the sentence. "Your Honor, this recording was made without my client's knowledge or consent. We object on privacy grounds and move to suppress." The judge looked at him over her reading glasses the way a contractor looks at a subcontractor who just cited the wrong code. "The recording was made in the respondent's own home, Counselor. In his own kitchen. By a device he installed on his own property." She turned to Dean. "Overruled. Play the footage." A clerk wheeled a monitor to the front of the courtroom. It was a 42-inch screen, the same size as the television Lorraine and I used to watch Sunday football on in the living room. Now it was about to broadcast the last night of our marriage to a room full of strangers. I had spent months collecting evidence the way you collect nails in a pouch one at a time, sorted by size, waiting for the moment the frame goes up. Every single one was about to be driven home at once. Dean pressed play. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. Kitchen angle, wide shot from the smoke detector housing. Lorraine walked into frame. She looked at the spot where the patio camera had been and smiled. Then she began speaking not to anyone in the room, but to the empty kitchen, delivering her accusations as though rehearsing for an audience that had not arrived yet. The stalker claim. The fear. the trembling voice that carried no tremor at all when she paused to check her phone. Then the calm walk to the garage. The engine starting. The reverse into the cul-de-sac. The headlights sweeping across the kitchen window in a deliberate arc, not the panicked swerve of a frightened woman, but the controlled turn of someone who had already chosen their target. Acceleration. Impact. Glass. Drywall. Silence. Then Lorraine climbing from the SUV without a limp, without a scratch, and immediately beginning to scream. The judge's pen stopped moving at the moment of impact and did not start again. In the gallery, a man in a gray suit shifted forward in his seat. Vance Prescott, watching the scheme he had helped architect play out on a screen he never imagined existed. Her own voice. The voice that used to tell me dinner was ready. The voice that used to read contracts aloud at the kitchen table while I calculated material costs on a legal pad decider. That voice was now about to confess in a courtroom full of people she had never planned to meet. "Your Honor," Dean said, "we would now like to play the audio captured 60 seconds before the respondent exited the home." The courtroom speakers were cheap ceiling-mounted units. The kind you find in government buildings, tinny, flat, stripped of warmth. But Lorraine's voice came through them with perfect clarity. "After tonight, he won't have the house or the company. Vance, just make sure the transfer is filed by Thursday." She had called him. 90 seconds before driving through the wall, and the camera she never found had recorded every word. Dean let the audio finish. Then he spoke without raising his voice. "The phone number on this recording belongs to Vance Prescott, the same individual named in the 40% equity transfer contract filed with this court as Exhibit 7. The same individual whose vehicle was parked on Ridgecrest Court the night of the crash. The same individual whose company, Crestline Advisory Group, received the wire transfers documented in Exhibits 3 through 5. The courtroom was silent. Not respectful silence. The silence of people who had just watched a building come down and were still processing the dust. Lorraine turned in her chair. Not toward Dean. Not toward the judge. Not toward the monitor still frozen on the last frame of her SUV buried in the bay window I had built with my own hands 15 years ago. She looked at me, and for the first time in 23 years, I saw something in her eyes that was not calculation, not strategy. Not the cold arithmetic of a woman who had mapped every angle of her exit. It was the look of someone who had just realized the building she had been demolishing was the one she was standing in. I held her gaze. I did not blink. I did not look away. And I felt nothing at all, which, if you have ever loved someone for 2 decades and then watched them try to destroy you, is the most terrifying feeling there is. Winning felt nothing like I thought it would. It tasted like courthouse coffee and smelled like a courtroom that had heard worse stories than mine and would hear worse again by Friday. The judge read her ruling in a voice that carried no satisfaction and no sympathy. The equity transfer was voided, fraudulent in its execution, unsupported by legitimate consideration, designed to strip operational control from a co-founder without disclosure or consent. I retained the house. I retained sole operational authority over Holbrook and Holbrook renovations pending the final divorce decree. The crash footage and all supporting exhibits were entered into the permanent record. The criminal side moved on its own schedule. Within the month, the district attorney's office filed attempted murder charges against Lorraine, based on the footage Dean had turned over the morning after the crash. Vance Prescott was named as a co-conspirator in the civil fraud suit and settled quietly rather than risk a criminal referral of his own. Sandra Whitmore's perjured affidavit went to the DA as well, attached as an exhibit in a case that would follow her long after she left Nevada. Dean called it the cleanest referral package he had ever handed a prosecutor. I did not feel like celebrating. I just felt like the record finally matched what had actually happened. Dean put his hand on my shoulder, the same gesture he had used to hold me in my seat when Sandra Whitmore testified. This time it meant something different. This time it meant we were done. Lorraine did not move. did not cry, did not reach for her attorney's arm or whisper an objection or shake her head. She stared at the table in front of her with the focus of someone reading blueprints for a building that no longer existed. Her attorney took notes beside her, careful, mechanical, the kind of documentation a man produces when he knows the appeal will never be filed. I have finished jobs where the client walks through the door of their new kitchen and cries, not because it is beautiful, but because the old one is gone forever, and they did not expect to miss it. That is what the courtroom felt like when the judge closed her folder. I had won, and the old kitchen was gone. The hallway outside the courtroom was the color of every government building I have ever walked through: beige walls, fluorescent light, tile that echoed. I saw Vance Prescott before Lorraine did. He was standing near the elevator bank in his gray suit, phone in hand, looking at the exit doors the way a man looks at a job site he has already decided to walk away from. Lorraine came through the courtroom doors and saw him. She walked toward Vance the way she used to walk toward me after we landed a big contract, shoulders back, chin lifted. Exactly an embrace that would confirm everything had gone according to plan. Vance turned his back. He pushed through the exit doors without looking at her, without breaking stride, without a single word. The glass door swung shut behind him and caught the light. Lorraine stopped in the middle of the corridor with her hand still half raised. Some demolitions you just watch. I walked past her, close enough to smell the perfume she had put on that morning, the same one she wore to client dinners. The one that used to mean we were celebrating. I did not stop. I did not speak. There was nothing left to say that the footage had not already said in a voice clearer than mine. Dean was waiting by the parking garage elevator. He loosened his tie for the first time in 4 months of working together. "He will be gone by the weekend," he said quietly. "Men like Prescott do not stay where the deal went bad." He was right. Within a week, I sat at my desk at the Spring Valley office and canceled every contract tied to Vance Prescott or the shell company. Each document went through the shredder, slow and deliberate, the way you pull nails from reclaimed lumber when you plan to reuse the wood. A subcontractor I had known for 12 years called to tell me Prescott's Henderson office was cleaned out. No forwarding address. No final call to Lorraine. No goodbye to anyone. Just an empty suite and a canceled lease. What do you do with a victory that gives you back everything except the one thing you actually lost? I drove past the house on Ridgecrest that evening. The bay window wall was covered in plywood now. A sheet of 3/4-inch CDX screwed into the framing I had built 15 years ago. The plywood was weathering already. Dark streaks where the rain had pooled in the screw heads. From the street it looked like a house that had been punched in the face and was waiting for someone to decide if it was worth fixing. I did not go inside. I drove to the rental apartment Dean had helped me find. A 2-bedroom unit in a complex off Sahara with carpet that smelled like the previous tenant's dog, and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. That night I sat at a folding table and spread out every document from the case. The company was mine. The house was mine. The stolen funds would be recovered in the settlement. But at the bottom of the stack was a set of divorce papers, printed and tabbed with yellow flags where the signatures belonged. My line was signed. Lorraine's was blank. The marriage was over in every way that mattered. But until she signed, I could not rebuild. She showed up 15 minutes early, the first time in 23 years Lorraine Holbrook had ever been early to anything that was not a sales pitch. Dean's office smelled like old leather and fresh paper. The divorce agreement sat in the center of his desk, tabbed with yellow flags, printed on the kind of heavy stock that makes you understand a document is not a draft. Lorraine stood by the window, looking out at downtown Las Vegas the way she used to look at neighborhoods we were considering for renovation, measuring, calculating, deciding what was worth keeping. She asked Dean if she could have a moment alone with me. He looked at me. I nodded. He stepped into the hallway and closed the door. "I did it for us." "Garrett," she said. She was not crying. Her voice carried the old pitch, steady, warm, calibrated. The voice that closed six-figure renovation contracts and convinced homeowners to sign change orders they had not budgeted for. The company was hemorrhaging. Vance had capital. I was trying to save what we built. She was selling again. Even now, with the pen on the table and the marriage in a manila folder, she closing. And for the first time, I understood that this was not a strategy. It was the only language she had left. "You drove a truck through our kitchen, Lorraine." She flinched. Not at the words, at the tone. Because there was nothing in it. No anger, no grief, no heat. Just a man stating a fact the way you state a measurement on a blueprint. 8 feet, 6 inches. Load-bearing. Non-negotiable. Signing a divorce is like pulling the last nail out of a wall you have already torn down. The structure has been gone for months. But that one piece of metal is what makes it official. Dean came back in. He set the pen on the table between us. A black ballpoint. The kind you find in office supply stores for 99 cents. I picked it up and signed my name on the line marked with a yellow tab. Steady hand. Same hand that had trembled on the steering wheel the night of the crash. That had shaken while transferring camera files in a gas station parking lot at 2 in the morning. It was not shaking now. I signed the way I sign a completion certificate final. No second draft. I set the pen down and slid it across the table. Lorraine looked at the pen for 3 seconds. Then she picked it up and signed. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered. Compact, careful, like she was rationing the ink. "It is done." "Garrett," Dean said. "The rest is paperwork." Lorraine picked up her purse, stood, and walked out. No goodbye. No parting glance at the man she had been married to since we were both young enough to believe that building a company together meant building a life. The door closed the way doors close, when nobody is coming back through them. A soft click, then nothing. I sat in Dean's office for another 10 minutes. He did not rush me. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine on his credenza and set one in front of me without asking. It was bitter and lukewarm. I drank all of it. People will tell you that winning feels good. And maybe it does when the thing you won is not the wreckage of the life you actually wanted. Over the following weeks, the Las Vegas renovation community learned what had happened. The model couple was not a model anymore. Clients called not to cancel, but to check in. Boyd Ramsey phoned on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice the same careful monotone he used when reading quarterly numbers. "Every client stayed, Garrett. Not one pulled a contract. They are calling to check on you." People kept using the word justice. I kept thinking of a different word, inventory. I was just counting what was left. Lorraine was ordered to cover the repair costs for the kitchen wall as part of the settlement. Someone on a job site mentioned she had moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in North Las Vegas. I did not ask which one. I did not want the address. I did not want to picture her in a kitchen smaller than the one she had destroyed. That curiosity was gone. And its absence was the clearest proof I had that whatever she had held over me for 23 years had finally let go. That Friday, I drove back to the house on Ridgecrest for the first time since the crash. The plywood was still screwed over the kitchen wall. The driveway still bore tire marks burned into the concrete. But when I unlocked the front door and stood in the hallway, I did not see damage. I saw renovation. And I had been renovating other people's lives for 15 years, without ever rebuilding my own. The contractor I hired to fix the kitchen wall did a decent job. Plumb lines were straight, mud was smooth, but I could tell he had never framed a wall that mattered to him. I stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning in August and pressed my palm flat against the new drywall. It was solid. The studs behind it were 16 on center. The tape joints were feathered properly. The paint matched within a shade of the original. A good job by any measure. But I could feel it. The way you can always feel someone else's work through the surface, there was no memory in this wall. No Sunday afternoon with a nail gun and a cold drink balanced on the sawhorses. No Lorraine handing me shims while I leveled the header. Just clean, professional, forgettable craftsmanship. I walked through the house one last time. The garage still had my workbench, so I loaded the toolbox into the truck. The framed contractor's license came off the hallway wall, leaving a rectangle of darker paint where it had hung for 10 years. In the office, I found a photo from the Henderson project in 2015. The two of us standing in front of a finished exterior, holding a bottle of champagne some client had sent. I picked it up, looked at it for about 5 seconds, and set it face down on the shelf. If you have ever walked out of a place that used to be yours and felt lighter with every step toward the truck, you know exactly what I am talking about. The weight does not lift all at once. It lifts in pieces, one for each room you decide not to look back at. I set the house key on the kitchen counter. The same counter I had laid with Italian porcelain 15 years ago. The new one was laminate. I did not adjust it. I did not straighten it. I walked out the front door, pulled it shut behind me, and did not look back when I reversed out of the driveway. Some buildings you walk away from. The Henderson job site was 40 minutes south on 215. I parked the truck on a gravel pad next to a dumpster already half full of demolition debris, and stepped out into air that smelled like fresh concrete and cut lumber. The sign on the chain link fence read, Holbrook Renovations. Just one name on the truck now. It looked right. The crew was small 4 guys I had worked with on previous jobs. Men who showed up early and did not ask questions about my personal life. The budget was modest. A kitchen and bath remodel for a retired couple who had found me through a referral from a subcontractor. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make the local business section. Just honest framing and clean finishes for people who wanted their home to feel like theirs again. I knelt on the fresh concrete footer and pressed the 4-foot level against the surface. The bubble floated dead center. First try. I smiled. First time in months. Alone on a concrete slab in Henderson, with sawdust already collecting on my knees and nobody there to see it. That made it real. A smile nobody performs for an audience is the only kind worth trusting. The sun dropped behind the spring mountains as I cleaned up the site. Orange light stretched across the valley floor the way it does in August long. Warm. The kind of light that makes new concrete glow like it is still curing. I stood at the edge of the foundation and looked at what I had poured that day. They tell you in this business that every wall can be saved if you sister the studs and shore the load. That is a lie contractors tell each other because tearing something out feels like failure. But some walls are rotten all the way through. Not from water damage or termites, but from the day they were framed crooked and nobody had the honesty to say so. The only real fix is to pull them out, haul the debris, and pour a new footer on ground you have tested yourself. I am 53 years old. I have one company, one truck, and a foundation that is level. That is enough. I drove home that night. Not to Summerlin West. Not to the rental off Sahara. To a 1-bedroom place I had signed a lease on that morning with nothing in it but a bed and a coffee maker. I set my toolbox by the front door, sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and thought about the first wall I ever framed at 22 years old. It was crooked. I tore it out and did it again. That is the whole story. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 23 years trusting someone with everything I had built the company. The house, the future I thought we were sharing. I ignored the warnings. I told myself the cracks were cosmetic when they ran all the way to the foundation. Do not make my mistake. When the people closest to you start hiding the numbers, start locking their phones, start introducing partners you have never heard of, pay attention. The signs are always there before the damage is. This was never a revenge story in the way people think of revenge. I did not set out to destroy anyone. I set out to protect what I had earned with my own hands. The real lesson is that you cannot save a structure someone else is deliberately tearing down from the inside. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop repairing and start rebuilding on ground that is yours alone. I believe God put me through this so I could stand here today and tell you, your worth is not measured by what someone takes from you. It is measured by what you build after they are gone. This is not a revenge story about anger. It is a revenge story about clarity. If this story moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done differently? Would you have confronted her sooner? Or played it the way I did? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and if you have not already, please subscribe so you never miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. God bless you and everyone you love. Just a reminder, certain details in this story were adjusted for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. What matters most is the message it carries.